them, and every stroke of it seemed to sound a note of doom. Yet here at the barrier the regulations compelled a momentary halt. Aline inquired of the sergeant in charge how long it was since a cabriolet such as she described had gone that way. She was answered that some 20 minutes ago a vehicle had passed the barrier containing the Deputy M. Lou Chapelier and the Paladin of the Third Estate, M. Moreau. The sergeant was very well informed. He could make a shrewd guess, he said with a grin, of the business that took M. Moreau that way so early in the day. They left him to speed on now through the open country, following the road that continued to hug the river. They sat back mutely despairing, staring hopelessly ahead, Aileen's hand clasped tight in Madame's. In the distance, across the meadows on their right, they could see already the long, dusky line of trees of the Bois, and presently the carriage swung aside, following a branch of the road that turned to the right, away from the river and heading straight for the forest. Mademoiselle broke at last the silence of hopelessness that had reigned between them since they had passed the barrier. "Oh, it is impossible that we should come in time. Impossible. Don't say it. Don't say it," Madame cried out. "But it is long past 9, Madame. André will be punctual, and these affairs do not take long. It will be all over by now." Madame shivered and closed her eyes. Presently, however, she opened them again and stirred. Then she put her head from the window. "A carriage is approaching," she announced, and her tone conveyed the thing she feared. "Not already? Oh, not already." Thus Aline expressed the silently communicated thought. She experienced a difficulty in breathing, felt the sudden need of air. Something in her throat was throbbing as if it would suffocate her. A mist came and went before her eyes. In a cloud of dust an open calèche was speeding towards them, coming from the Bois. They watched it, both pale, neither venturing to speak, Aline, indeed, without breath to do so. As it approached, it slowed down, perforce as they did, to effect a safe passage in that narrow road. Aline was at the window with Madame de Plougastel, and with fearful eyes both looked into this open carriage that was drawing abreast of them. "Which of them is it, Madame? Oh, which of them?" gasped Aline, scarce daring to look, her senses swimming. On the near side sat a swarthy young gentleman, unknown to either of the ladies. He was smiling as he spoke to his companion. A moment later, and the man sitting beyond came into view. He was not smiling. His face was white and set, and it was the face of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur. For a long moment, in speechless horror, both women stared at him, until, perceiving them, Blanquia's surprise invaded his stern face. In that moment, with a long, shuddering sigh, Aline sank swooning to the carriage floor behind Madame de Plougastel. Chapter 11. Inferences. By fast driving, André-Louis had reached the ground some minutes ahead of time, notwithstanding the slight delay in setting out. There he found M. de la Tour d'Azur already awaiting him, supported by A.M. d'Ormesson, a swarthy young gentleman in the blue uniform of a captain in the Gardes du Corps. André-Louis had been silent and preoccupied throughout that drive. He was perturbed by his last interview with Mademoiselle de Kercadia and the rash inferences which he had drawn as to her motives. Decidedly, he had said, this man must be killed. Lou Chapelier had not answered him. Almost, indeed, had the Breton shuddered at his compatriot's cold-bloodedness. He had often of late thought that this fellow Moreau was hardly human. Also, he had found him incomprehensibly inconsistent. When first the spadassinicide business had been proposed to him, he had been so very lofty and disdainful. Yet, having embraced it, he went about it at times with a ghoulish flippancy that was revolting, at times with detachment that was more revolting still. Their preparations were made quickly and in silence, yet without undue haste or other sign of nervousness on either side. In both men the same grim determination prevailed. The opponent must be killed. There could be no half measures here. Stripped each of coat and waistcoat, shoeless and with shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, they faced each other at last, with a common resolve of paying in full the long score that stood between them. I doubt if either of them entertained a misgiving as to what must be the issue. Beside them and opposite each other stood Lou Chapelier and the young captain, alert and watchful. Alès Messers. The slender, wickedly delicate blades clashed together, and after a momentary glissade were whirling, swift and bright as lightnings, and almost as impossible to follow with the eye. The Marquis led the attack, impetuously and vigorously, and almost at once André-Louis realized that he had to deal with an opponent of a very different metal from those successive duelists of last week, not excluding La Madueo, of terrible reputation. Here was a man who, much in constant practice, had given extraordinary speed and a technique that was almost perfect. In addition, he enjoyed over André-Louis' physical advantages of strength and length of reach, which rendered him altogether formidable. And he was cool, too. Cool and self-contained, fearless and purposeful. Would anything shake that calm? Wondered André-Louis. He desired the punishment to be as full as he could make it. Not content to kill the Marquis, as the Marquis had killed Philippe, he desired that he should first know himself as powerless to avert that death as Philippe had been. Nothing less would content André-Louis. Le Marquis must begin by tasting of that cup of despair. It was in the account, par of the quittance due. As with a breaking sweep, André-Louis parried the heavy lunge in which that first series of passes culminated. He actually laughed, gleefully, after the fashion of a boy at a sport he loves. That extraordinary, ill-timed laugh made de La Tour d'Azur's recovery hastier and less correctly dignified than it would otherwise have been. It startled and discomposed him, who had already been discomposed by the failure to get home with a lunge so beautifully timed and so truly delivered. He, too, had realized that his opponent's force was above anything that he could have expected, fencing master though he might be, and on that account he had put forth his utmost energy to make an end at once. More than the actual parry, the laugh by which it was accompanied seemed to make of that end no more than a beginning, and yet it was the end of something. It was the end of that absolute confidence that had hitherto inspired de La Tour d'Azur. He no longer looked upon the issue as a thing foregone. He realized that if he was to prevail in this encounter, he must go warily and fence as he had never fenced yet in all his life. They settled down again, and again, on the principle this time that the soundest defense is an attack. It was the Marquis who made the game. André-Louis allowed him to do so, desired him to do so, desired him to spend himself in that magnificent speed of his against the greater speed that whole days of fencing in succession for nearly 2 years had given the master. With a beautiful, easy pressure forte on foible, André-Louis kept himself completely covered in that second bout, which once more culminated in a lunge. Expecting it now, André-Louis parried it by no more than a deflecting touch. At the same moment, he stepped suddenly forward, right within the other's guard, thus placing his man so completely at his mercy that, as if fascinated, the Marquis did not even attempt to recover himself. This time, André-Louis did not laugh. He just smiled into the dilating eyes of de La Tour d'Azur and made no shift to use his advantage. Come, monsieur," he bade him sharply. "Am I to run my blade through an uncovered man?" Deliberately he fell back, whilst his shaken opponent recovered himself at last. Diormesson released a breath which horror had for a moment caught. Le Chapelier swore softly, muttering, "Name of a name, it is tempting Providence to play the fool in this fashion." André-Louis observed the ashen pallor that now overspread the face of his opponent. "I think you begin to realize, monsieur, what Philippe de Vilmorin must have felt that day at Gavrillac. I desire that you should first do so. Since that is accomplished, why, here's to make an end." He went in with lightning rapidity. For a moment his point seemed to La Tour d'Azur to be everywhere at once, and then from a low engagement in sixth, André-Louis stretched forward with swift and vigorous ease to lunge and tierce. He drove his point to transfix his opponent, whom a series of calculated disengages uncovered in that line. But to his amazement and chagrin, La Tour d'Azur parried the stroke. Infinitely more to his chagrin, La Tour d'Azur parried it just too late. Had he completely parried it, all would yet have been well. But striking the blade in the last fraction of a second, the Marquis deflected the point from the line of his body. Yet not so completely, but that a couple of feet of that hard-driven steel tore through the muscles of his sword arm. To the seconds, none of these details had been visible. All that they had seen had been a swift whirl of flashing blades, and then André-Louis stretched almost aground in an upward lunge that had pierced the Marquis' right arm just below the shoulder. The sword fell from the suddenly relaxed grip of La Tour d'Azur's fingers, which had been rendered powerless, and he stood now disarmed, his lip in his teeth, his face white, his chest heaving, before his opponent, who had at once recovered. With the blood-tinged tip of his sword resting on the ground, André-Louis surveyed him grimly, as we survey the prey that through our own clumsiness has escaped us at the last moment. In the assembly and in the newspapers, this might be hailed as another victory for the paladin of the Third Estate. Only himself could know the extent and the bitterness of the failure. Dear Messon had sprung to the side of his principal. "You are hurt," he had cried stupidly. "It is nothing," said La Tour-d'Azur. "A scratch." But his lip writhed, and the torn sleeve of his fine cambric shirt was full of blood. Dormesson, a practical man in such matters, produced a linen kerchief, which he tore quickly into strips to improvise a bandage. Still André-Louis continued to stand there, looking on as if bemused. He continued so until Le Chapelier touched him on the arm. Then at last he roused himself, sighed, and turned away to resume his garments. Nor did he address or look again at his late opponent, but left the ground at once. As, with Le Chapelier, he was walking slowly and in silent dejection toward the entrance of Bois, where they had left their carriage, they were passed by the calèche conveying La Tour-d'Azur and his second, which had originally driven almost right up to the spot of the encounter. The Marquis' wounded arm was carried in a sling improvised from his companion's sword belt. His sky-blue coat with 3 collars had been buttoned over this, so that the right sleeve hung empty. Otherwise, saving a certain pallor, he looked much his usual self. And now you understand how it was that he was the first to return, and that seeing him thus returning, apparently safe and sound, the 2 ladies, intent upon preventing the encounter, should have assumed that their worst fears were realized. Madame de Plougastel attempted to call out, but her voice refused its office. She attempted to throw open the door of her own carriage, but her fingers fumbled clumsily and ineffectively with the handle. And meanwhile the calèche was slowly passing, La Tour-d'Azur's fine eyes somberly yet intently meeting her own anguished gaze. And then she saw something else. Dear Messon, leaning back again from the forward inclination of his body to join his own to his companion's salutation of the Countess, disclosed the empty right sleeve of de La Tour-d'Azur's blue coat. More, the near side of the coat itself, turned back from the point near the throat where it was caught together by a single button, revealed the slung arm beneath in its blood-sodden cambric sleeve. Even now she feared to jump to the obvious conclusion, feared lest perhaps the Marquis, though himself wounded, might have dealt his adversary a deadlier wound. She found her voice at last, and at the same moment signaled to the driver of the calèche to stop. As it was pulled to a standstill, Dear Messon alighted, and so met Madame in the little space between the 2 carriages. "Where's Moreau?" was a question with which he surprised him. "Following at his leisure, no doubt, Madame," he answered, recovering. "He is not hurt?" "Unfortunately, it is we who, Dear Messon was beginning, when from behind him, de La Tour-d'Azur's voice cut in crisply. "This interest on your part in Moreau, dear Countess," he broke off, observing a vague challenge in the air with which he confronted him. But indeed his sentence did not need completing. There was a vaguely awkward pause. And then she looked at dear Messon. Her manner changed. She offered what appeared to be an explanation of her concern for Moreau. "Mademoiselle de Kercadia is with me. The poor child has fainted." There was more, a deal more, she would have said just then, but for dear Messon's presence. Moved by a deep solicitude for Mademoiselle de Kercadia, de La Tour-d'Azur sprang up despite his wound. "I am in poor case to render assistance, madam," he said, an apologetic smile on his pale face. "But..." With the aid of Dior Messon, and in spite of the latter's protestations, he got down from calèche, which then moved on a little way, so as to leave the road clear, for another carriage that was approaching from the direction of the Bois. And thus it happened that when a few moments later that approaching cabriolet overtook and passed the halted vehicles, André-Louis beheld a very touching scene. Standing up to obtain a better view, he saw Aline in a half-swooning condition. She was beginning to revive by now, seated in the doorway of the carriage, supported by Madame de Plougastel. In an attitude of deepest concern, de La Tour-d'Azur, his wound notwithstanding, was bending over the girl, whilst behind him stood Dior Messon and Madame's footman. The Countess looked up and saw him as he was driven past. Her face lighted. Almost it seemed to him she was about to greet him or to call him. Wherefore, to avoid a difficulty arising out of the presence there of his late antagonist, he anticipated her by bowing frigidly, for his mood was frigid, the more frigid by virtue of what he saw, and then resumed his seat with eyes that looked deliberately ahead. Could anything more completely have confirmed him in his conviction that it was on M. de la Tour d'Azur's account that Aline had come to plead with him that morning? For what his eyes had seen, of course, was a lady overcome with emotion at the sight of blood of her dear friend, and that same dear friend restoring her with assurances that his hurt was very far from mortal. Later, much later, he was to blame his own perverse stupidity, almost as he too severe in his self-condemnation. For how else could he have interpreted the scene he beheld? His preconceptions being what they were, that which he had already been suspecting, he now accounted proven to him. Aline had been wanting in candor on the subject of her feelings towards M. de la Tour d'Azur. It was, he supposed, a woman's way to be secretive in such matters, and he must not blame her, nor could he blame her in his heart for having succumbed to the singular charm of such a man as the Marquis, for not even his hostility could blind him to M. de la Tour d'Azur's attractions. That she had succumbed was betrayed, he thought, by the weakness that had overtaken her upon seeing him wounded. "My God!" he cried aloud. "What must she have suffered, then, if I had killed him as I intended? If only she had used candor with him, she could so easily have won his consent to the things she asked. If only she had told him what now he saw, that she loved M. de la Tour d'Azur, instead of leaving him to assume her only regard for the Marquis to be based on unworthy worldly ambition, he would at once have yielded." He fetched a sigh and breathed a prayer for forgiveness to the shade of Vilmorin. "It is perhaps as well that my lunge went wide," he said. "What do you mean?" wondered Le Chapelier. "That in this business I must relinquish all hope of recommencing." Chapter 12. The overwhelming reason. M. de la Tour d'Azur was seen no more in the Manège, or indeed in Paris at all, throughout all the months that the National Assembly remained in session to complete its work of providing France with a constitution. After all, though the wound to his body had been comparatively slight, the wound to such a pride as his had been all but mortal. The rumor ran that he had emigrated, but that was only half the truth. The whole of it was that he had joined that group of noble travelers who came and went between the Tuileries and the headquarters of the émigrés at Coblentz. He became, in short, a member of the Royalist Secret Service that in the end was to bring down the monarchy in ruins. As for André-Louis, his godfather's house saw him no more, as a result of his conviction that M. de Circadia would not relent from his written resolve never to receive him again if the duel were fought. He threw himself into his duties at the Assembly with such zeal and effect that when, its purpose accomplished, the Constituent was dissolved in September the following year, membership of the Legislative, whose election followed immediately, was thrust upon him. He considered then, like many others, that the revolution was a thing accomplished, that France had only to govern herself by the Constitution which had been given her, and that all would now be well. And so it might have been, but that the court could not bring itself to accept the altered state of things. As a result of its intrigues, half Europe was arming to hurl herself upon France, and her quarrel was a quarrel of the French king with his people. That was the horror at the root of all the horrors that were to come. Of the counter-revolutionary troubles that were everywhere being stirred up by the clergy, none were more acute than those of Brittany. And in view of the influence it was hoped he would wield in his native province, it was proposed to André-Louis by the Commission of 12, in the early days of the Girondin ministry, that he should go thither to combat the unrest. He was desired to proceed peacefully, but his powers were almost absolute, as is shown by the orders he carried. Orders enjoining all to render him assistance, and warning those who might hinder him that they would do so at their peril. He accepted the task, and he was one of the 5 plenipotentiaries dispatched on the same errand in that spring of 1792. It kept him absent from Paris for 4 months, and might have kept him longer, but that at the beginning of August he was recalled. More imminent than any trouble in Brittany was the trouble brewing in Paris itself, when the political sky was blacker than it had been since '89. Paris realized that the hour was rapidly approaching, which would see the climax of the long struggle between equality and privilege. And it was towards a city so disposed that André-Louis came speeding from the west, to find there also the climax of his own disturbed career. Émilie de Circadia, too, was in Paris in those days of early August, on a visit to her uncle's cousin and dearest friend, Madame de Plougastel. And although nothing could now be plainer than the seething unrest that heralded the explosion to come, yet the air of gaiety, indeed of jocularity, prevailing at court, whither Madame and Mademoiselle went almost daily, reassured them. De Plougastel had come and gone again, back to Koblenz on that secret business that kept him now almost constantly absent from his wife. But whilst with her, he had positively assured her that all measures were taken, and that an insurrection was a thing to be welcomed, because it could have one only conclusion, the final crushing of the revolution in the courtyard of the Tuileries. That, he added, was why the king remained in Paris, but for his confidence in that he would put himself in the center of his Swiss and his Knights of the Dagger and quit the capital. They would hack a way out for him easily if his departure were opposed, but not even that would be necessary. Yet in those early days of August, after her husband's departure, the effect of his inspiring words was gradually dissipated by the march of events under Madame's own eyes. And finally, on the afternoon of the 9th, there arrived at the Hotel Plougastel a messenger from Meudon bearing a note from M. de Circadia, in which he urgently bade Mademoiselle join him there at once, and advised her hostess to accompany her. You may have realized that M. de Circadia was of those who make friends with men of all classes. His ancient lineage placed him on terms of equality with members of the noblesse. His simple manners, something between the rustic and the bourgeois, and his natural affability placed him on equally good terms with those who by birth were his inferiors. In Meudon he was known and esteemed of all the simple folk, and it was Regain, the friendly mayor, who, informed on the 9th of August of the storm that was brewing for the morrow, and knowing of Mademoiselle's absence in Paris, had warningly advised him to withdraw her from what in the next 24 hours might be a zone of danger for all persons of quality, particularly those suspected of connections with the court party. Now, there was no doubt whatever of Madame de Plougastel's connection with the court. It was not even to be doubted. Indeed, measure of proof of it was to be forthcoming, that those vigilant and ubiquitous secret societies that watched over the cradle of the young revolution were fully informed of the frequent journeyings of M. de Plougastel to Koblenz, and entertained no illusions on the score of the reason for them. Given, then, a defeat of the court party in the struggle that was preparing, the position in Paris of Madame de Plougastel could not be other than fraught with danger, and that danger would be shared by any guest of birth at her hotel. M. de Circadia's affection for both those women quickened the fears aroused in him by Regain's warning. Hence that hastily dispatched note, desiring his niece and imploring his friend to come at once to Meudon. The friendly mayor carried his complaisance a step farther, and dispatched a letter to Paris by the hands of his own son, an intelligent lad of 19. It was late in the afternoon of that perfect August day when young Regain presented himself at the Hotel Plougastel. He was graciously received by Madame de Plougastel in the salon, whose splendors, when combined with the great air of the lady herself, overwhelmed the lad's simple, unsophisticated soul. Madame made up her mind at once. M. de Circadia's urgent message no more than confirmed her own fears and inclinations. She decided upon instant departure. Bien, madame, said the youth, then I have the honor to take my leave. But she would not let him go. First to the kitchen to refresh himself, while she and Mademoiselle made ready, and then a seat for him in her carriage as far as Meudon. She could not suffer him to return on foot as he had come, though in all the circumstances it was no more than his due. Yet the kindliness that in such a moment of agitation could take thought for another was presently to be rewarded. Had she done less than this, she would have known, if nothing worse, at least some hours of anguish even greater than those that were already in store for her. It wanted, perhaps, a half hour to sunset when they set out in her carriage with intent to leave Paris by the Porte Saint-Martin. They traveled with a single footman behind. Regain, terrifying condescension, was given a seat inside the carriage with the ladies, and proceeded to fall in love with M. de Circadia, whom he accounted the most beautiful being he had ever seen, yet who talked to him simply and unaffectedly as an equal. The thing went to his head a little, and disturbed certain republican notions which he had hitherto conceived himself to have thoroughly digested. The carriage drew up at the barrier, checked there by a picket of the National Guard posted before the iron gates. The sergeant in command strode to the door of the vehicle. The Countess put her head from the window. "The barrier is closed, madam," she was curtly informed. "Closed," she echoed. The thing was incredible. But do you mean that we cannot pass?" "Not unless you have a permit, madam." The sergeant leaned nonchalantly on his pike. "The orders are that no one is to leave or enter without proper papers. Whose orders? Orders of the Commune of Paris. But I must go into the country this evening. Madame's voice was almost petulant. I am expected. In that case, let Madame procure a permit. Where is it to be procured? At the Hotel de Ville or at the headquarters of Madame's section? She considered a moment. To the section, then. Be so good as to tell my coachman to drive to the Bondy section. He saluted her and stepped back. Section Bondy, Rue de Morts. He bade the driver. Madame sank into her seat again, in a state of agitation fully shared by Mademoiselle. Regain set himself to pacify and reassure them. The section would put the matter in order. They would most certainly be accorded a permit. What possible reason could there be for refusing them? A mere formality, after all. His assurance uplifted them merely to prepare them for a still more profound dejection, when presently they met with flat refusal from the president of the section, who received the Countess. Your name, madam? He had asked brusquely, a rude fellow of the most advanced Republican type. He had not even risen out of deference to the ladies when they entered. He was there. He would have told you to perform the duties of his office, not to give dancing lessons. Plougastel, he repeated after her, without title, as if it had been the name of a butcher or baker. He took down a heavy volume from a shelf on his right, opened it, and turned the pages. It was a sort of directory of his section. Presently he found what he sought. Comte de Plougastel, Hotel Plougastel, Rue du Paradis. Is that it? That is correct, monsieur, she answered, with what civility she could muster before the fellow's affronting rudeness. There was a long moment of silence, during which he studied certain penciled entries against the name. The sections had been working in the last few weeks much more systematically than was generally suspected. Your husband is with you, madam? He asked curtly, his eyes still conning that page. Le Comte is not with me, she answered, stressing the title. Not with you? He looked up suddenly and directed upon her a glance in which suspicion seemed to blend with derision. Where is he? He is not in Paris, monsieur. Ah, is he at Koblenz, do you think? Madame felt herself turning cold. There was something ominous in all this. To what end had the sections informed themselves so thoroughly of the comings and goings of their inhabitants? What was preparing? She had a sense of being trapped, of being taken in a net that had been cast unseen. I do not know, monsieur, she said, her voice unsteady. Of course not. He seemed to sneer. No matter. And you wish to leave Paris also? Where do you desire to go? To Meudon. Your business there? The blood leapt to her face. His insolence was unbearable to a woman who in all her life had never known anything but the utmost deference from inferiors and equals alike. Nevertheless, realizing that she was face to face with forces entirely new, she controlled herself, stifled her resentment, and answered steadily, I wish to conduct this lady, Emilie de Circadia, back to her uncle who resides there. Is that all? Another day will do for that, madam. The matter is not pressing. Pardon, monsieur, to us the matter is very pressing. You have not convinced me of it, and the barriers are closed to all who cannot prove the most urgent and satisfactory reasons for wishing to pass. You will wait, madam, until the restriction is removed. Good evening. But, monsieur... Good evening, madam, he repeated significantly, a dismissal more contemptuous and despotic than any royal, you have leave to go. Madam went out with Aline. Both were quivering with the anger that prudence had urged them to suppress. They climbed into the coach again, desiring to be driven home. Regain's astonishment turned into dismay when they told him what had taken place. Why not try the Hotel de Ville, madam? He suggested. After that, it would be useless. We must resign ourselves to remaining in Paris until the barriers are opened again. Perhaps it will not matter to us either way by then, madam, said Aline. Aline! She exclaimed in horror. Mademoiselle! Cried Regain on the same note. And then, because he perceived that people detained in this fashion must be in some danger not yet discernible, but on that account more dreadful, he set his wits to work. As they were approaching the Hotel Plougastel once more, he announced that he had solved the problem. A passport from without would do equally well, he announced. Listen now and trust me, I will go back to Meudon at once. My father shall give me 2 permits, one for myself alone and another for 3 persons, From Meudon to Paris and back to Meudon. I re-enter Paris with my own permit, which I then proceed to destroy. And we leave together, we three, on the strength of the other one, representing ourselves as having come from Meudon in the course of the day. It is quite simple. After all, if I go at once, I shall be back tonight. But how will you leave? Asked Aline. Pooh! As to that, have no anxiety. My father is mayor of Meudon. There are plenty who know him. I will go to the Hôtel de Ville and tell them what is, after all, true, that I am caught in Paris by the closing of the barriers, and that my father is expecting me home this evening. They will pass me through. It is quite simple. His confidence uplifted them again. The thing seemed as easy as he represented it. Then let your passport be for 4, my friend. Madame begged him. There is Jacques, she explained, indicating the footman who had just assisted them to alight. Rougain departed confident of soon returning, leaving them to await him with the same confidence. But the hours succeeded one another. The night closed in, bedtime came, and still there was no sign of his return. They waited until midnight, each pretending for the other's sake to a confidence fully sustained, each invaded by vague premonitions of evil, yet beguiling the time by playing trick-track in the great salon, as if they had not a single anxious thought between them. At last, on the stroke of midnight, Madame sighed and rose. It will be for tomorrow morning, she said, not believing it. Of course, Aline agreed. It would really have been impossible for him to have returned tonight, and it will be much better to travel tomorrow. The journey at so late an hour would tire you so much, dear madam. Thus they made pretense. Early in the morning they were awakened by a din of bells, the tocsins of the sections ringing the alarm. To their startled ears came later the rolling of drums, and at one time they heard the sound of multitude on the march. Paris was rising. Later still came the rattle of small arms in the distance, and the deeper boom of cannon. Battle was joined between the men of the sections and the men of the court. The people in arms had attacked the Tuileries. Wildest rumors flew in all directions, and some of them found their way through the servants to the Hôtel Plougastel of that terrible fight for the palace, which was to end in the purposeless massacre of all those whom the invertebrate monarch abandoned there, whilst placing himself and his family under protection of the assembly. Purposeless to the end, ever adopting the course pointed out to him by evil counselors, he prepared for resistance only until the need for resistance really arose, whereupon he ordered surrender, which left those who had stood by him to the last at the mercy of a frenzied mob. And while this was happening in the Tuileries, the 2 women at the Hôtel Plougastel still waited for the return of Rougain, though now with ever-lessening hope. And Rougain did not return. The affair did not appear so simple to the father as to the son. Rougain the elder was rightly afraid to lend himself to such a piece of deception. He went with his son to inform M. de Kercadiou of what had happened, and told him frankly the thing his son suggested, but which he dared not do. M. de Kercadiou sought to move him by intercessions, and even by the offer of bribes. But Rougain remained firm. Monsieur, he said, if it were discovered against me, as inevitably would be, I should hang for it. Apart from that, and in spite of my anxiety to do all in my power to serve you, it would be a breach of trust such as I could not contemplate. You must not ask me, monsieur. But what do you conceive is going to happen? Asked the half-demented gentleman. It is war, said Rougain, who was well informed, as we have seen. War between the people and the court. I am desolated that my warning should have come too late. But when all is said, I do not think that you need really alarm yourself. War will not be made on women. De Kercadiou clung for comfort to that assurance after the mayor and his son had departed. But at the back of his mind there remained the knowledge of the traffic in which M. de Plougastel was engaged. What if the revolutionaries were equally well informed? And most probably they were. The womenfolk political offenders had been known aforetime to suffer for the sins of their men. Anything was possible in a popular upheaval, and Aline would be exposed jointly with Madame de Plougastel. Late that night, as he sat gloomily in his brother's library, the pipe in which he had sought solace extinguished between his fingers, there came a sharp knocking at the door. To the old seneschal of Gavrillac, who went to open, there stood revealed upon the threshold a slim young man in a dark olive surcoat, the skirts of which reached down to his calves. He wore boots, buckskins, and a small sword, and round his waist there was a tricolor sash, and his hat a tricolor cockade, which gave him an official look extremely sinister to the eyes of that old retainer of feudalism, who shared to the full his master's present fears. "Monsieur desires?" he asked, between respect and mistrust, and then a crisp voice startled him. "Why, Benoit? Name of a name. Have you completely forgotten me?" With a shaking hand, the old man raised a lantern he carried so as to throw its light more fully upon that lean, wide-mouthed countenance. "M. André!" he cried. "M. André!" And then he looked at the sash and the cockade and hesitated, apparently at a loss. But André-Louis stepped past him into the wide vestibule, with its tessellated floor of black and white marble. "If my godfather has not yet retired, take me to him. If he has retired, take me to him all the same." "Oh, but certainly, André, and I am sure he will be ravished to see you." "No, he has not yet retired. This way, André, this way, if you please." The returning André-Louis, reaching Mutin a half hour ago, had gone straight to Mayor for some definite news of what might be happening in Paris that should either confirm or dispel the ominous rumors that had met in ever-increasing volume as he approached the capital. Regain informed him that insurrection was imminent, that already the sections had possessed themselves of the barriers, and that it was impossible for any person not fully accredited to enter or leave the city. André-Louis bowed his head, his thoughts of the gravest. He had for some time perceived the danger of this second revolution from within the first, which might destroy everything that had been done, and give the reins of power to a villainous faction that would plunge the country into anarchy. The thing he had feared was more than ever on the point of taking place. He would go on at once, that very night, and see for himself what was happening. And then, as he was leaving, he turned again to Regain to ask if de Circadia was still at Mutin. "You know him, monsieur. He is my godfather." "Your godfather? And you a representative? Why, then, you may be the very man he needs." And Regain told him of his son's errand into Paris that afternoon, and its result. No more was required. That 2 years ago his godfather should upon certain terms have refused him his house weighed for nothing at the moment. He left his traveling carriage at the little inn and went straight to de Circadia. And de Circadia, startled in such an hour by this sudden apparition of one against whom he nursed a bitter grievance, greeted him in terms almost identical with those in which in that same room he had greeted him on a similar occasion once before. "What do you want here, sir?" "To serve you, if possible, my godfather," was a disarming answer, but it did not disarm de Circadia. "You have stayed away so long that I hoped you would not again disturb me. I should not have ventured to disobey you now were it not for the hope that I can be of service. I have seen Regain the mayor. What's that you say about not venturing to disobey? You forbade me your house, monsieur." De Circadia stared at him helplessly. "And is that why you have not come near me in all this time?" "Of course. Why else?" De Circadia continued to stare. Then he swore under his breath. It disconcerted him to have to deal with a man who insisted upon taking him so literally. He had expected that André-Louis would have come contritely to admit his fault and beg to be taken back into favor. He said so. "But how could I hope that you meant less than you said, monsieur? You were so very definite in your declaration. What expressions of contrition could have served me without a purpose of amendment? And I had no notion of amending. We may yet be thankful for that." "Thankful? I am a representative. I have certain powers. I am very opportunely returning to Paris. Can I serve you where Regain cannot? The need, monsieur, would appear to be very urgent if the half of what I suspect is true. Aline should be placed in safety at once." De Circadia surrendered unconditionally. He came over and took André-Louis' hand. "My boy," he said, and he was visibly moved, "there is in you a certain nobility that is not to be denied. If I seemed harsh with you, then it was because I was fighting against your evil proclivities. I desire to keep you out of the evil path of politics that have brought this unfortunate country into so terrible a pass. The enemy on the frontier, civil war about to flame out at home. That is what you revolutionaries have done." André-Louis did not argue. He passed on. "About Aline?" he asked, and himself answered his own question. "She is in Paris, and she must be brought out of it at once. before the place becomes a shambles, as well it may once the passions that have been brewing all these months are let loose. Young Regain's plan is good. At least, I cannot think of a better one. But Regain the elder will not hear of it. You mean, he will not do it on his own responsibility, but he has consented to do it on mine. I have left him a note over my signature to the effect that a safe conduct for Emily de Circadia to go to Paris and return is issued by him in compliance with orders from me. The powers I carry and of which I have satisfied him are a sufficient justification for obeying me in this. I have left him that note on the understanding that he is to use it only in an extreme case, for his own protection. In exchange, he has given me this safe conduct. You already have it. De Circadia took the sheet of paper that André-Louis held out. His hand shook. He approached it to the cluster of candles burning on the console and screwed up his short-sighted eyes to read. If you send that to Paris by young Regain in the morning, said André-Louis, Aline should be here by noon. Nothing, of course, could be done tonight without provoking suspicion. The hour is too late. And now, monsieur my godfather, you know exactly why I intrude in violation of your commands. If there is any other way in which I can serve you, you have but to name it whilst I am here. But there is André. Did not Regain tell you that there are others? He mentioned Madame de Plougastel and her servant. Then why? De Circadia broke off, looking his question. Very solemnly André-Louis shook his head. That is impossible, he said. De Circadia's mouth fell open in astonishment. Impossible, he repeated. But why? Monsieur, I can do what I am doing for Aline without offending my conscience. Besides, for Aline I would offend my conscience and do it. But Madame de Plougastel is in very different case. Neither Aline nor any of hers have been concerned in counter-revolutionary work, which is the true source of the calamity that now threatens to overtake us. I can procure her removal from Paris without self-reproach, convinced that I am doing nothing that anyone could censure or that might become the subject of inquiries. But Madame de Plougastel is the wife of Luc Comte de Plougastel, whom all the world knows to be an agent between the court and the émigrés. That is no fault of hers, cried de Circadia through his consternation. Agreed, but she may be called upon at any moment to establish the fact that she is not a party to these maneuvers. It is known that she was in Paris today. Should she be sought tomorrow and should it be found that she has gone, inquiries will certainly be made, from which it must result that I have betrayed my trust and abused my powers to serve personal ends. I hope, monsieur, that you will understand that the risk is too great to be run for the sake of a stranger. A stranger? Said the seigneur reproachfully. Practically a stranger to me, said André-Louis. But she is not a stranger to me, André. She is my cousin, and very dear and valued friend. And, mon Dieu, what you say but increases the urgency of getting her out of Paris. She must be rescued. André, at all costs, she must be rescued. Why? Her case is infinitely more urgent than Aline's. He stood a suppliant before his godson, very different now from the stern man who had greeted him on his arrival. His face was pale, his hands shook, and there were beads of perspiration on his brow. Monsieur my godfather, I would do anything in reason, but I cannot do this. To rescue her might mean ruin for Aline and yourself as well as for me. We must take the risk. You have a right to speak for yourself, of course. Oh, and for you, believe me, André, for you. He came close to the young man. André, I implore you to take my word for that, and to obtain this permit from Madame de Plougastel. André looked at him mystified. This is fantastic, he said. I have grateful memories of the lady's interest in me for a few days once when I was a child, and again more recently in Paris when she sought to convert me to what she accounts the true political religion. But I do not risk my neck for her. No, nor yours, nor Aline's. But, André, that is my last word, monsieur. It is growing late, and I desire to sleep in Paris. No, wait. The Lord of Gavrillac was displaying signs of unspeakable distress. André, you must. There was in this insistence, and, still more, in the frenzied manner of it, something so unreasonable that André could not fail to assume that some dark and mysterious motive lay behind it. I must, he echoed. Why must I? Your reasons, monsieur. André, my reasons are overwhelming. Pray allow me to be the judge of that. André-Louis' manner was almost peremptory. The demand seemed to reduce M. de Circadia to despair. He paced the room, his hands tight clasped behind him, his brow wrinkled. At last he came to stand before his godson. "Can't you take my word for it that these reasons exist?" he cried in anguish. "In such a matter as this, a matter that may involve my neck? Oh, monsieur, is that reasonable? I violate my word of honor, my oath, if I tell you." De Circadia turned away, wringing his hands, his condition visibly piteous, then turned again to André. "But in this extremity, in this desperate extremity, and since you so ungenerously insist, I shall have to tell you. God help me, I have no choice. She will realize that when she knows. André, my boy," he paused again, a man afraid. He set a hand on his godson's shoulder, and to his increasing amazement, André-Louis perceived that over those pale, short-sighted eyes there was a film of tears. "Madame de Plougastel is your mother." Followed, for a long moment, utter silence. This thing that he was told was not immediately understood. When understanding came at last, André-Louis' first impulse was to cry out, but he possessed himself and played the stoic. He must ever be playing something. That was in his nature, and he was true to his nature even in this supreme moment. He continued silent until, obeying that queer histrionic instinct, he could trust himself to speak without emotion. "I see," he said at last, quite coolly. His mind was sweeping back over the past. Swiftly, he reviewed his memories of Madame de Plougastel, her singular sporadic interest in him, the curious blend of affection and wistfulness which her manner towards him had always presented. And at last he understood so much that hitherto had intrigued him. "I see," he said again, and added now, "Of course, any buffoon would have guessed it long ago." It was M. de Circadia who cried out, and de Circadia who recoiled as from a blow. "My God, André, of what you made? You can take such an announcement in this fashion. And how would you have me take it? Should it surprise me to discover that I had a mother? After all, a mother is an indispensable necessity to getting oneself born." He sat down abruptly to conceal the too revealing fact that his limbs were shaking. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket to mop his brow, which had grown damp, and then quite suddenly he found himself weeping. At the sight of those tears streaming silently down that face that had turned so pale, M. de Circadia came quickly across to him. He sat down beside him and threw an arm affectionately over his shoulder. "André, my poor lad," he murmured, I was fool enough to think you had no heart. You deceived me with your infernal pretense, and now I see. He was not sure what it was that he saw, or else he hesitated to express it. "It is nothing, monsieur. I am tired out, and I have a cold in the head." And then, finding the part beyond his power, he abruptly threw it up, utterly abandoned all pretense. "Why? Why has there been all this mystery?" he asked. "Was it intended that I should never know? It was André. It had to be for prudence sake. But why? Complete your confidence, sir. Surely you cannot leave it there. Having told me so much, you must tell me all. The reason, my boy, is that you were born some 3 years after your mother's marriage with M. de Plougastel, some 18 months after M. de Plougastel had been away with the army, and some 4 months before his return to his wife. It is a matter that M. de Plougastel has never suspected, and for gravest family reasons must never suspect. That is why the utmost secrecy has been preserved. That is why none was ever allowed to know. Your mother came at times into Brittany, and under an assumed name spent some months in the village of Moreau. It was while she was there that you were born." André-Louis turned it over in his mind. He had dried his tears, and sat now rigid and collected. "When you say that none was ever allowed to know, you are telling me, of course, that you, monsieur—" "Oh, mon Dieu, no." The denial came in a violent outburst. M. de Circadia sprang to his feet, propelled from André's side by the violence of his emotions. It was as if the very suggestion filled him with horror. "I was the only other one who knew. But it is not as you think. André, you cannot imagine that I should lie to you, that I should deny you if you were my son. If you say that I am not, monsieur, That is sufficient. You are not. I was Teresa's cousin and also, as she well knew, her truest friend. She knew that she could trust me, and it was to me she came for help in her extremity. Once, years before, I would have married her. But, of course, I am not the sort of man a woman could love. She trusted, however, to my love for her, and I have kept her trust. Then, who was my father? I don't know. She never told me. It was her secret, and I did not pry. It is not in my nature, André. André-Louis got up and stood silently facing M. de Circadia. You believe me, André? Naturally, monsieur, and I am sorry. I am sorry that I am not your son. M. de Circadia gripped his godson's hand convulsively and held a moment with no word spoken. Then, as they fell away from each other again, "And now, what will you do, André?" he asked. "Now that you know?" André-Louis stood a while, considering, then broke into laughter. The situation had its humors. He explained them. What difference should the knowledge make? Is filial piety to be called into existence by the mere announcement of relationship? Am I to risk my neck through lack of circumspection on behalf of a mother so very circumspect that she had no intention of ever revealing herself? The discovery rests upon the merest chance, upon a fall of the dice of fate. Is that to weigh with me? The decision is with you, André. Nay, it is beyond me. Decided who can, I cannot. You mean that you refuse even now? I mean that I consent. Since I cannot decide what it is that I should do, it only remains for me to do what a son should. It is grotesque, but all life is grotesque. You will never, never regret it. I hope not, said André. Yet I think it very likely that I shall. And now I had better see Regain again at once, and obtain from him the other 2 permits required. Then perhaps it will be best that I take them to Paris myself. In the morning. If you will give me a bed, monsieur, I shall be grateful. I confess that I am hardly in case to do more tonight. Chapter 13. Sanctuary. Into the late afternoon of that endless day of horror with perpetual alarms, its volleying musketry, rolling drums, and distant muttering of angry multitudes, Madame de Plougastel and Aline sat waiting in that handsome house in the Rue du Paradis. It was no longer for Regain they waited. They realized that, be the reason what it might, and by now many reasons must no doubt exist, this friendly messenger would not return. They waited without knowing for what. They waited for whatever might betide. At one time early in the afternoon, the roar of battle approached them, racing swiftly in their direction, swelling each moment in volume and in horror. It was a frenzied clamor of a multitude drunk with blood and bent on destruction. Near at hand, that fierce wave of humanity checked in its turbulent progress. Followed blows of pikes upon a door and imperious calls to open, and thereafter came the rending of timbers, the shivering of glass, screams of terror blending with screams of rage, and, running through these shrill sounds, the deeper diapason of bestial laughter. It was a hunt of 2 wretched Swiss guardsmen seeking blindly to escape, and they were run to earth in a house in the neighborhood, and they're cruelly done to death by that demoniac mob. The thing accomplished, the hunters, male and female, forming into a battalion, came swinging down the Rue du Paradis, chanting the Song of Marseilles, a song new to Paris in those days. Nearer it came, raucously bawled by some hundreds of voices, a dread sound that comes so suddenly to displace at least temporarily the merry, trivial air of the say are, which hitherto had been a revolutionary carillon. Instinctively Madame de Plougastel and Aline clung to each other. They had heard the sound of the ravishing of that other house in the neighborhood, without knowledge of the reason. What if now it should be the turn of the Hotel Plougastel? There was no real cause to fear it, save amid a turmoil imperfectly understood, and therefore more awe-inspiring. The worst must be feared always. The dreadful song so dreadfully sung, and the thunder of heavily shod feet upon a roughly paved street, passed on and receded. They breathed again, almost as if a miracle had saved them, to yield to fresh alarm an instant later, when Madame's young footman, Jacques, the most trusted of her servants, burst into their presence unceremoniously with a scared face, bringing the announcement that a man who had just climbed over the garden wall professed himself a friend of Madame's, and desired to be brought immediately to her presence. "But he looks like a sans-culotte, madame," the staunch fellow warned her. Her thoughts and hopes leapt at once to Regain. "Bring him in," she commanded breathlessly. Jacques went out, to return presently accompanied by a tall man in a long, shabby, and very ample overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat that was turned down all round and adorned by an enormous tricolor cockade. This hat he removed as he entered. Jacques, standing behind him, perceived that his hair, although now in some disorder, bore signs of having been carefully dressed. It was clubbed, and it carried some lingering vestiges of powder. The young footman wondered what it was in the man's face, which was turned from him, that should cause his mistress to cry out in recoil. Then he found himself dismissed abruptly by a gesture. The newcomer advanced to the middle of the salon, moving like a man exhausted and breathing hard. There he leaned against a table, across which he confronted Madame de Plougastel, and she stood regarding him, a strange horror in her eyes. In the background, on a settle at the salon's far end, sat Aline staring bewilderment and some fear at a face which, if unrecognizable to the mass of blood and dust that smeared it, was yet familiar. And then the man spoke, and instantly she knew the voice for that of the Marquis de la Tour-d'Azur. "My dear friend," he was saying, "forgive me if I startled you. Forgive me if I thrust myself in here without leave, at such a time, in such a manner. But you see how it is with me. I am a fugitive. In the course of my distracted flight, not knowing which way to turn for safety, I thought of you. I told myself that if I could but safely reach your house, I might find sanctuary. You are in danger? In danger?" Almost he seemed silently to laugh at the unnecessary question. "If I were to show myself open in the streets just now, I might with luck contrive to live for 5 minutes. My friend, it has been a massacre. Some few of us escaped from the Tuileries at the end, to be hunted to death in the streets. I doubt if by this time a single Swiss survives. They had the worst of it. Poor devils. And as for us, my God, they hate us more than they hate the Swiss. Hence this filthy disguise." He peeled off the shaggy greatcoat, and casting it from him, stepped forth in the black satin that had been the general livery of the 100 Knights of the Dagger, who had rallied in the Tuileries that morning to the defense of their king. His coat was rent across the back. His neckcloth and the ruffles at his wrists were torn and blood-stained. With his smeared face and disordered headdress, he was terrible to behold. Yet he contrived to carry himself with his habitual easy assurance, remembered to kiss the trembling hand which Madame de Plougastel extended to him in welcome. "You did well to come to me, Gervais," she said. "Yes, here is sanctuary for the present. You will be quite safe, at least for as long as we are safe. My servants are entirely trustworthy. Sit down and tell me all." He obeyed her, collapsing almost into the armchair which she thrust forward, a man exhausted, whether by physical exertion or by nerve strain, or both. He drew a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped some of the blood and dirt from his face. "It is soon told." His tone was bitter with the bitterness of despair. "This, my dear, is the end of us. Plougastel is lucky in being across the frontier at such a time. Had I not been fool enough to trust those who today have proved themselves utterly unworthy of trust, that is where I should be myself. My remaining in Paris is the crowning folly of a life full of follies and mistakes. That I should come to you in my hour of most urgent need adds point to it." He laughed in his bitterness. Madame moistened her dry lips. "And now," she asked him, "it only remains to get away as soon as may be, if it is still possible. Here in France there is no longer any room for us, at least not above ground. Today has proved it." And then he looked up at her, standing there beside him, so pale and timid, and he smiled. He patted the fine hand that rested upon the arm of his chair. "My dear Therese, unless you carry charitableness to the length of giving me to drink, you will see me perish of thirst under your eyes before ever the canaille has a chance to finish me." She started. "I should have thought of it," she cried in self-reproach, and she turned quickly. "Aline," she begged, "tell Jacques to bring—" "Aline!" he echoed, interrupting, and swinging round in his turn. Then, as Aline rose into view, detaching from her background, and he at last perceived her, he heaved himself abruptly to his weary legs again, and stood there stiffly bowing to her across the space of gleaming floor. "Mademoiselle, I had not suspected your presence," he said, and he seemed extraordinarily ill at ease, a man startled, as if caught in an illicit act. "I perceived it, monsieur," she answered, as she advanced to do Madame's commission. She paused before him. From my heart, monsieur, I grieve that we should meet again in circumstances so very painful. Not since the day of his duel with André-Louis, the day which had seen the death and burial of his last hope of winning her, had they stood face to face. He checked as if on the point of answering her. His glance strayed to Madame de Plougastel, and, oddly reticent for one who could be very glib, he bowed in silence. But sit, monsieur, I beg. You are fatigued. You are gracious to observe it. With your permission, then. And he resumed his seat. She continued on her way to the door and passed out upon her errand. When presently she returned, they had almost unaccountably changed places. It was Madame de Plougastel who was seated in that armchair of brocade and gilt, and M. de la Tour d'Azur, who, despite his lassitude, was leaning over the back of it talking earnestly, seeming by his attitude to plead with her. On Aileen's entrance, he broke off instantly and moved away, so that she was left with a sense of having intruded. Further, she observed that the Countess was in tears. Following her came presently the diligent Jacques, bearing a tray laden with food and wine. Madame poured for her guest, and he drank a long draught of the Burgundy, then begged, holding forth his grimy hands, that he might mend his appearance before sitting down to eat. He was led away and valeted by Jacques, and when he returned he had removed from his person the last vestige of the rough handling he had received. He looked almost his normal self, the disorder in his attire repaired, calm and dignified and courtly in his bearing, but very pale and haggard of face, seeming suddenly to have increasing years, to have reached an appearance the age that was in fact his own. As he ate and drank, and this with appetite, for as he told them he had not tasted food since early morning, he entered into the details of the dreadful events of the day, and gave them particulars of his own escape from the Tuileries when all was seen to be lost, and when the Swiss, having burnt their last cartridge, were submitting to wholesale massacre at the hands of the indescribably furious mob. "Oh, it was almost done," he ended critically. "We were timid when we should have been resolute, and resolute at last when it was too late. That is the history of our side from the beginning of this accursed struggle. We have lacked proper leadership throughout, and now, as I have said already, there is an end to us. It but remains to escape as soon as we can discover how the thing is to be accomplished." Madame told him of the hopes that she had centered upon regain. It lifted him out of his gloom. He was disposed to be optimistic. "You are wrong to have abandoned that hope," he assured her. "If this mayor is so well disposed, he certainly can do as his son promised. But last night, it would have been too late for him to have reached you, and today, assuming that he had come to Paris, almost impossible for him to win across the streets from the other side. It is most likely that he will yet come. I pray that he may, for the knowledge that you and Emily de Circadia are out of this would comfort me above all." "We should take you with us," said Madame. "Ah, but how?" "Young Regain was to bring me permits for 3 persons, Aline, myself, and my footman, Jacques. You would take the place of Jacques." "Faith! To get out of Paris, Madame, there is no man whose place I would not take." And he laughed. Their spirits rose with his, and their flagging hopes revived. But as dusk descended again upon the city, without any sign of the deliverer they awaited, those hopes began to ebb once more. M. de la Tour d'Azur at last pleaded weariness, and begged to be permitted to withdraw, that he might endeavor to take some rest against whatever might have to be faced in the immediate future. When it had gone, Madame persuaded Aline to go and lie down. "I will call you, my dear, the moment he arrives," she said, bravely maintaining that pretense of confidence that had by now entirely evaporated. Aline kissed her affectionately and departed, outwardly so calm and unperturbed as to leave the Countess wondering whether she realized the peril by which they were surrounded, a peril infinitely increased by the presence in that house of a man so widely known and detested as M. de la Tour d'Azur, a man who was probably being sought for by his enemies at this moment. Left alone, Madame lay down on a couch in the salon itself, to be ready for any emergency. It was a hot summer night, and the glass doors opening upon the luxuriant garden stood wide to admit the air. On that air came intermittently from the distance sounds of continuing horrible activities of the populace, the aftermath of that bloody day. Madame de Plougastel lay there, listening to those sounds for upwards of an hour, thanking heaven that for the present at least the disturbances were distant, dreading lest at any moment they should occur nearer at hand, lest this bondy section, in which her hotel was situated should become the scene of horrors similar to those whose echoes reached her ears from other sections away to the south and west. The couch occupied by the Countess lay in shadow, for all the lights in that long salon had been extinguished with the exception of a cluster of candles and a massive silver candle branch placed on a round marquetry table in the middle of the room, an island of light in the surrounding gloom. The timepiece on the overmantel chimed melodiously the hour of 10, and then, startling in the suddenness with which it broke the immediate silence, another sound vibrated through the house and brought Madame to her feet, in a breathless mingling of hope and dread. Someone was knocking sharply on the door below. Followed moments of agonized suspense, culminating in the abrupt invasion of the room by the footman Jacques. He looked round, not seeing his mistress at first. "Madam, madam," he panted, out of breath. "What is it, Jacques?" Her voice was steady now that the need for self-control seemed thrust upon her. She advanced in the shadows into that island of light about the table. "There's a man below. He is demanding to see you at once." "A man?" she questioned. He seems to be an official. At least he wears a sash of office. And he refuses to give any name. He says that his name would convey nothing to you. He insists that he must see you in person and at once." "An official?" said Madame. "An official?" Jacques repeated. "I would not have admitted him, but that he demanded it in the name of the nation. Madame, it is for you to say what shall be done. Robert is with me. If you wish it, whatever it may be—" "My good Jacques, no, no." She was perfectly composed. If this man intended evil, surely he would not come alone. "Conduct him to me, and then beg Emily de Cacadia to join me if she is awake." Jacques departed, himself partly reassured. Madame seated herself in the armchair by the table well within the light. She smoothed her dress with a mechanical hand. If, as it would seem, her hopes had been futile, so had her momentary fears. A man on any but an errand of peace would have brought some following with him, as she had said. The door opened again, and Jacques reappeared. After him, stepping briskly past him, came a slight man in a wide-brimmed hat, adorned by a tricolor cockade. About the waist of an olive-green riding coat, he wore a broad tricolor sash. A sword hung at his side. He swept off his hat, and the candlelight glinted on the steel buckle in front of it. Madame found herself silently regarded by a pair of large, dark eyes set in a lean, brown face, eyes that were most singularly intent and searching. She leaned forward. Incredulity swept across her countenance. Then her eyes kindled, and the color came creeping back into her pale cheeks. She rose suddenly. She was trembling. "André-Louis," she exclaimed. Chapter 14. The barrier, that gift of laughter, seemed utterly extinguished. For once there was no gleam of humor in those dark eyes, as they continued to consider her with that queer stare scrutiny. And yet, though his gaze was somber, his thoughts were not. With his cruelly true mental vision, which pierced through shams, and his capacity for detached observation, which properly applied might have carried him very far. Indeed, he perceived the grotesqueness, the artificiality of the emotion which in that moment he experienced, but by which he refused to be possessed. It sprang entirely from the consciousness that she was his mother, as if, all things considered, the more or less accidental fact that she had brought him into the world could establish between them any real bond at this time of day. The motherhood that bears and forsakes is less than animal. He had considered this. He had been given ample leisure in which to consider it during those long, turbulent hours in which he had been forced to wait, because it would have been almost impossible to have won across that seething city, and certainly unwise to have attempted so to do. He had reached the conclusion that by consenting to go to her rescue at such a time, he stood committed to a piece of purely sentimental quixotry. The quittances which the mayor of Meudon had exacted from him before he would issue the necessary safe conducts placed the whole of his future, perhaps his very life, in jeopardy, and he had consented to do this not for the sake of reality, but out of regard for an idea. He who all his life had avoided the false lure of worthless and hollow sentimentality. Thus thought André-Louis as he considered her now so searchingly, finding it, naturally enough, a matter of extraordinary interest to look consciously upon his mother for the first time at the age of 28. From her he looked at last at Jacques, who remained at attention, waiting by the open door. "Could we be alone, madam?" he asked her. She waved the footman away, and the door closed. in agitated silence, unquestioning. She waited for him to account for his presence there at so extraordinary a time. Regain could not return, he informed her shortly. At M. de Circadia's request, I come instead. You are sent to rescue us. The note of amazement in her voice was stronger than that of her relief. That, and to make your acquaintance, madam. To make my acquaintance? But what do you mean, André-Louis? This letter from M. de Circadia will tell you. Intrigued by his odd words and odder manner, she took the folded sheet. She broke the seal with shaking hands, and with shaking hands approached the written page to the light. Her eyes grew troubled as she read. The shaking of her hands increased, and midway through that reading a moan escaped her. One glance that was almost terror she darted at the slim, straight man standing so incredibly impassive upon the edge of the light, and then she endeavored to read on, but the crabbed characters of M. de Circadia swam distortedly under her eyes. She could not read. Besides, what could it matter what else he said? She had read enough. The sheet fluttered from her hands to the table, and out of a face that was like a face of wax, she looked now with a wistfulness, a sadness indescribable, at André-Louis. And so you know, my child? Her voice was stifled to a whisper. I know, madam, my mother. The grimness, the subtle blend of merciless derision and reproach in which it was uttered completely escaped her. She cried out at the new name. For her, in that moment time, and the world stood still. Her peril there in Paris, as the wife of an intriguer at Koblenz, was blotted out, together with every other consideration. Thrust out of consciousness, I could find room for nothing else beside the fact that she stood acknowledged by her only son, this child begotten in adultery, born furtively and in shame in a remote Brittany village 28 years ago. Not even a thought for the betrayal of that inviolable secret, or the consequences that might follow, could she spare in this supreme moment. She took one or two faltering steps towards him, hesitating. Then she opened her arms. Sobs suffocated her voice. Won't you come to me, André-Louis? A moment, yet he stood hesitating, startled by that appeal, angered almost by his heart's response to it. Reason and sentiment had grips in his soul. This was not real, his reason postulated. This poignant emotion that she displayed and that he experienced was fantastic. Yet he went. Her arms enfolded him. Her wet cheek was pressed hard against his own. Her frame, which the years had not yet succeeded in robbing of its grace, was shaken by the passionate storm within her. Oh, André-Louis, my child, if you knew how I have hungered to hold you so, if you knew how in denying myself this, I have atoned and suffered. Circadia should not have told you, not even now. It was wrong, most wrong perhaps to you. It would have been better that he should have left me here to my fate, whatever that may be. And yet, come what may of this, to be able to hold you so, to be able to acknowledge you, to hear you call me mother. Oh, André-Louis, I cannot now regret it. I cannot wish it otherwise. Is there any need, madam? He asked her, his stoicism deeply shaken. There is no occasion to take others into our confidence. This is for tonight alone. Tonight we are mother and son. Tomorrow we resume our former places, and, outwardly at least, forget. Forget? Have you no heart, André-Louis? The question recalled him curiously to his attitude towards life, that histrionic attitude of his that he accounted true philosophy. Also he remembered what lay before them, and he realized that he must master not only himself but her, that to yield too far to sentiment at such a time might be the ruin of them all. It is a question propounded to me so often that it must contain the truth, said he. My rearing is to blame for that. She tightened her clutch about his neck even as he would have attempted to disengage himself from her embrace. You do not blame me for your rearing? Knowing all as you do, André-Louis, you cannot altogether blame. You must be merciful to me. You must forgive me. You must. I had no choice. When we know all whatever may be, we can never do anything but forgive, madam. That is the profoundest religious truth that was ever written. It contains, in fact, a whole religion, the noblest religion any man could have to guide him. I say this for your comfort, madam, my mother. She sprang away from him with a startled cry. Beyond him in the shadows, by the door, a pale figure shimmered ghostly. It advanced into the light and resolved itself into Aline. She had come in answer to that forgotten summons Madame had sent her by Jacques. Entering unperceived, she had seen André-Louis in the embrace of the woman whom he addressed as mother. She had recognized him instantly by his voice, and she could not have said what bewildered her more, his presence there or the thing she overheard. "You heard, Aline?" Madame exclaimed. "I could not help it, Madame. You sent for me. I am sorry if—" She broke off, and looked at André-Louis long and curiously. She was pale, but quite composed. She held out her hand to him. "And so you have come at last, André," said she. "You might have come before." "I come when I am wanted," was his answer, which is the only time in which one could be sure of being received. He said it without bitterness, and having said it, stooped to kiss her hand. "You can forgive me what is past, I hope, since I failed in my purpose," he said gently, half pleading. "I could not have come to you pretending that the failure was intentional, a compromise between the necessities of the case and your own wishes. For it was not that, and yet you do not seem to have profited by my failure. You are still a maid." She turned her shoulder to him. "There are things," she said, "that you will never understand. Life, for one," he acknowledged. "I confess that I am finding it bewildering. The very explanations calculated to simplify it seem but to complicate it further." And he looked at Madame de Plougastel. "You mean something, I suppose," said Mademoiselle. "Aline!" It was the Countess who spoke. She knew the danger of half-discoveries. "I can trust you, child, I know, and André-Louis, I am sure, will offer no objection." She had taken up the letter to show it to Aline, yet first her eyes questioned him. "Oh, none, madam," he assured her. "It is entirely a matter for yourself." Aline looked from one to the other with troubled eyes, hesitating to take the letter that was now proffered. When she had read it through, she very thoughtfully replaced it on the table. A moment she stood there with bowed head, the other two watching her. Then impulsively she ran to Madame and put her arms about her. "Aline!" It was a cry of wonder, almost a joy. "You do not utterly abhor me." "My dear," said Aline, and kissed the tear-stained face that seemed to have grown years older in these last few hours. In the background, André-Louis, steeling himself against emotionalism, spoke with the voice of Scaramouche. "It would be well, mesdames, to postpone all transports until they can be indulged at greater leisure and in more security. It is growing late. If we are to get out of this shambles, we should be wise to take the road without more delay." It was a tonic as effective as it was necessary. It startled them into remembrance of their circumstances, and under the spur of it, they went at once to make their preparations. They left him for perhaps a quarter of an hour, to pace that long room alone, saved only from impatience by the turmoil of his mind. When at length they returned, they were accompanied by a tall man in a full-skirted shaggy greatcoat, and a broad hat the brim of which was turned down all around. He remained respectfully by the door in the shadows. Between them the two women had concerted it thus, or rather the Countess had so concerted it, when Aline had warned her that André-Louis' bitter hostility toward the Marquis made it unthinkable that he should move a finger consciously to save him. Now, despite the close friendship uniting M. de Kercadia and his niece with Madame de Plougastel, there were several matters concerning them of which the Countess was in ignorance. One of these was a project at one time existing of a marriage between Aline and M. de la Tour d'Azur. It was a matter that Aline, naturally enough in the state of her feelings, had never mentioned, nor had M. de Kercadia ever alluded to it since his coming to Meudon, by when he perceived how unlikely it was ever to be realized. M. de la Tour d'Azur's concern for Aline on that morning of the duel, when he had found her half-swooning in Madame de Plougastel's carriage, had been of a circumspection that betrayed nothing of his real interest in her, and therefore had appeared no more than natural in one who must account himself the cause of her distress. Similarly, Madame de Plougastel had never realized, nor did she realize now, for Aline did not trouble fully to enlighten her, that the hostility between the two men was other than political, the quarrel other than that which already had taken André-Louis to the Bois on every day of the preceding week. But at least she realized that even if André-Louis' rancor should have no other source, yet that inconclusive duel was cause enough for Aline's fears. And so she had proposed this obvious deception, and Aline had consented to be a passive party to it. They had made the mistake of not fully forewarning and persuading M. de la Tour d'Azur. They had trusted entirely to his anxiety to escape from Paris, to keep him rigidly within the part imposed upon him. They had reckoned without the queer sense of honor that moved such men as M. Le Marquis, nurtured upon a code of shams. André-Louis, turning to scan that muffled figure, advanced from the dark depths of the salon. As the light beat on his white, lean face the pseudo-footman started. The next moment, he too stepped forward into the light and swept his broad-brimmed hat from his brow. As he did so, André-Louis observed that his hand was fine and white, and that a jewel flashed from one of the fingers. Then he caught his breath, and stiffened in every line as he recognized the face revealed to him. "Monsieur," that stern, proud man was saying, "I cannot take advantage of your ignorance. If these ladies can persuade you to save me, at least it is due to you that you shall know whom you are saving." He stood there by the table, very erect and dignified, ready to perish as he lived. If perish he must, without fear and without deception. André-Louis came slowly forward until he reached the table on the other side, and then at last the muscles of his set face relaxed, and he laughed. "You laugh?" said M. de la Tour d'Azur, frowning, offended. "It is so damnably amusing," said André-Louis. "You've an odd sense of humor, M. Moreau." "Oh, admitted. The unexpected always moves me so. I have found you many things in the course of our acquaintance. Tonight you are the one thing I never expected to find you, an honest man." M. de la Tour d'Azur quivered, but he attempted no reply. "Because of that, monsieur, I am disposed to be clement. It is probably a foolishness, but you have surprised me into it. I give you 3 minutes, monsieur, in which to leave this house, and to take your own measures for your safety. What afterwards happens to you shall be no concern of mine." "Ah, no, André." "Listen," Madame began in anguish. "Pardon, madame. It is the utmost that I will do, and already I am violating what I conceive to be my duty. If M. de la Tour d'Azur remains, he not only ruins himself, but he imperils you, for unless he departs at once, he goes with me to the headquarters of the section, and the section will have his head on a pike inside the hour. He is a notorious counter-revolutionary, a knight of the dagger, one of those whom an exasperated populace is determined to exterminate. Now, monsieur, you know what awaits you. Resolve yourself and at once, for these ladies' sake. But you don't know André-Louis." Madame de Plougastel's condition was one of anguish indescribable. She came to him and clutched his arm. "For the love of heaven, André-Louis, be merciful with him. You must. But that is what I am being, madame, merciful, more merciful than he deserves. And he knows it. Fate has meddled most oddly in our concerns to bring us together tonight. Almost it is as if fate were forcing retribution at last upon him. Yet for your sakes, I take no advantage of it, provided that he does at once as I desired him." And now from beyond the table the Marquis spoke icily, and as he spoke his right hand stirred under the ample folds of his greatcoat. "I am glad, M. Moreau, that you take that tone with me. You relieve me of the last scruple. You spoke of fate just now, and I must agree with you that fate has meddled oddly, though perhaps not to the end that you discern. For years now you have chosen to stand in my path and thwart me at every turn, holding over me a perpetual menace. Persistently you have sought my life in various ways, first indirectly and at last directly. Your intervention in my affairs has ruined my highest hopes, more effectively, perhaps, than you suppose. Throughout you have been my evil genius, and you are even one of the agents of this climax of despair that has been reached by me tonight." "Wait, listen." Madame was panting. She flung away from André-Louis, as if moved by some premonition of what was coming. "Gervais, this is horrible. Horrible, perhaps, but inevitable. Himself, he has invited it. I am a man in despair, the fugitive of a lost cause. That man holds the keys of escape. And besides, between him and me, there is a reckoning to be paid." His hand came from beneath the coat at last, and it came armed with a pistol. Madame de Plougastel screamed and flung herself upon him. On her knees now, she clung to his arm with all her strength and might. Vainly he sought to shake himself free of that desperate clutch. "Therese," he cried, "are you mad? Will you destroy me and yourself? This creature has the safe conducts that mean our salvation. Himself, he is nothing. From the background, Aline, a breathless, horror-stricken spectator of that scene, spoke sharply, her quick mind pointing out the line of checkmate. Burn the safe conducts, André-Louis. Burn them at once. And the candles there. But André-Louis had taken advantage of that moment of de la Tour d'Azur's impotence to draw a pistol in his turn. I think it would be better to burn his brains instead, he said. Stand away from him, madame. Far from obeying that imperious command, Madame de Plougastel rose to her feet to cover the Marquis with her body, but she still clung to his arm, clung to it with unsuspected strength that continued to prevent him from attempting to use the pistol. André, for God's sake, André, she panted hoarsely over her shoulder. Stand away, madam, he commanded her again more sternly, and let this murderer take his due. He is jeopardizing all our lives, and his own has been forfeit these years. Stand away. He sprang forward with intent now to fire at his enemy over her shoulder, and Aline moved too late to hinder him. André, panting, gasping, haggard of face, on the verge almost of hysteria, the distracted countess flung at last an effective, a terrible barrier between the hatred of those men, each intent upon taking the other's life. He is your father, André. Gervais, he is your son, our son. The letter there on the table. Oh, my God. And she slipped nervelessly to the ground and crouched there sobbing at the feet of M. de la Tour d'Azur. Chapter 15. Safe conduct. Across the body of that convulsively sobbing woman, the mother of one and the mistress of the other, the eyes of those mortal enemies met, invested with startled, appalled interest that admitted of no words. Beyond the table, as if turned to stone by this culminating horror of revelation, stood Aline. M. de la Tour d'Azur was the first to stir. Into his bewildered mind came the memory of something that Madame de Plougastel had said of a letter that was on the table. He came forward, unhindered. The announcement made, Madame de Plougastel no longer feared the sequel, and so she let him go. He walked unsteadily past this newfound son of his, and took up the sheet that lay beside the candle branch. A long moment he stood reading it, none heeding him. Aline's eyes were all on André-Louis, full of wonder and commiseration, whilst André-Louis was staring down, in stupefied fascination, at his mother. M. de la Tour d'Azur read the letter slowly through. Then very quietly he replaced it. His next concern, being the product of an artificial age sternly schooled in the suppression of emotion, was to compose himself. Then he stepped back to Madame de Plougastel's side and stooped to raise her. Therese, he said, obeying by instinct the implied command. She made an effort to rise and control herself in her turn. The Marquis half conducted, half carried her to the armchair by the table. André-Louis looked on, still numbed and bewildered. He made no attempt to assist. He saw as in a dream the Marquis bending over Madame de Plougastel. As in a dream he heard him ask, How long have you known this, Therese? I have always known it. Always? I confided him to Circadia. I saw him once as a child. Oh, but what of that? Why was I never told? Why did you deceive me? Why did you tell me that this child had died a few days after birth? Why, Therese? Why? I was afraid. I thought it better so, that nobody, not even you, should know. And nobody has known save Quentin until last night, when to induce him to come here and save me, he was forced to tell him. But I, Therese, the Marquis insisted. It was my right to know. Your right? What could you have done? Acknowledge him? And then, It was a queer, desperate note of laughter. There was Plougastel, there was my family, and there was you yourself who had ceased to care, in whom the fear of discovery had stifled love. Why should I have told you then? Why? I should not have told you now had there been any other way to save you both. Once before I suffered just such dreadful apprehensions when you and he fought in the Bois. I was on my way to prevent it when you met me. I would have divulged the truth as a last resource to avert that horror. But mercifully God spared me the necessity then. It had not occurred to any of them to doubt her statement, incredible though it might seem. Had any done so, her present words must have resolved all doubt, explaining as they did much that to each of her listeners had been obscure until this moment. M. de la Tour d'Azur, Overcome, reeled away to a chair and sat down heavily. Losing command of himself for a moment, he took his haggard face in his hands. Through the windows open to the garden came from the distance the faint throbbing of a drum to remind them of what was happening around them. But the sound went unheeded. To each it must have seemed that here they were face to face with a horror greater than any that might be tormenting Paris. At last André-Louis began to speak, his voice level and unutterably cold. M. de la Tour-d'Azur, he said, I trust that you'll agree that this disclosure, which can hardly be more distasteful and horrible to you than it is to me, alters nothing, since it effaces nothing of all that lies between us. Or, if it alters anything, it is merely to add something to that score. And yet, but what can avail to talk? Here, monsieur, take this safe conduct which is made out for Madame de Plougastel's footman, and with it make your escape as best you can. In return, I will beg of you the favor never to allow me to see you or hear of you again. André, his mother swung upon him with that cry, and yet again that question, have you no heart? What has he ever done to you that you should nurse so bitter a hatred of him? You shall hear, madam. Once, 2 years ago in this very room, I told you a man who had brutally killed my dearest friend and debauched the girl I was to have married. M. de la Tour-d'Azur is that man. A moan was her only answer. She covered her face with her hands. The Marquis rose slowly to his feet again. He came slowly forward, his smoldering eyes scanning his son's face. You are hard, he said grimly, but I recognize the hardness. It derives from the blood you bear. Spare me that, said André-Louis. The Marquis inclined his head. I will not mention it again, but I desire that you should at least understand me, and you, too, Therese. You accuse me, sir, of murdering your dearest friend. I will admit that the means employed were perhaps unworthy. But what other means were at my command to meet an urgency that every day since then proves to have existed? M. de Vilmorin was a revolutionary, a man of new ideas that should overthrow society and rebuild it more akin to desires of such as himself. I belong to the order that quite as justifiably desired society to remain as it was. Not only was it better so for me and mine, but I also contend, and you have yet to prove me wrong, that it is better so for all the world, that, indeed, no other conceivable society is possible. Every human society must of necessity be composed of several strata. You may disturb it temporarily into an amorphous whole by a revolution such as this, but only temporarily. Soon out of the chaos, which is all that you and your kind can ever produce, order must be restored, or life will perish. And with the restoration of order comes the restoration of the various strata necessary to organize society. Those that were yesterday at the top may, in the new order of things, find themselves dispossessed without any benefit to the whole. That change I resisted. The spirit of it, I fought with whatever weapons were available, whenever and wherever I encountered it. M. de Vilmorin was an incendiary of the worst type, a man of eloquence full of false ideals that misled poor ignorant men into believing that the change opposed could make the world a better place for them. You are an intelligent man, and I defy you to answer me from your heart and conscience that such a thing was true or possible. You know that it is untrue. You know that it is a pernicious doctrine. And what made it worse on the lips of M. de Vilmorin was that he was sincere and eloquent. His voice was a danger that must be removed, silenced. So much was necessary in self-defense. In self-defense I did it. I had no grudge against M. de Vilmorin. He was a man of my own class, a gentleman of pleasant ways, amiable, estimable, and able. You conceive me slaying him for the very lust of slaying, like some beast of the jungle flinging itself upon its natural prey. That has been your error from first. I did what I did with the very heaviest heart. Oh, spare me your sneer. I do not lie. I have never lied, and I swear to you here and now, by my every hope of heaven, that what I say is true. I loathe the thing I did, yet for my own sake and the sake of my order, I must do it. Ask yourself whether M. de Vilmorin would have hesitated for a moment if by procuring my death he could have brought the utopia of his dreams a moment nearer realization. After that, you determined that the sweetest vengeance would be to frustrate my ends by reviving in yourself the voice that I had silenced, by yourself carrying forward the fantastic apostleship of equality that was M. de Vilmorin's. You lacked a vision that would have shown you that God did not create men equals. Well, you are encased tonight to judge which of us was right, which wrong. You see what is happening here in Paris. You see the foul specter of anarchy stalking through a land fallen into confusion. Probably you have enough imagination to conceive something of what must follow. And do you deceive yourself that out of this filth and ruin there will rise up an ideal form of society? Don't you understand that society must reorder itself presently out of all this? But why say more? I must have said enough to make you understand the only thing that really matters, that I killed M. de Vilmorin as a matter of duty to my order. And the truth, which though it may offend you should also convince you, is that tonight I can look back on the deed with equanimity, without a single regret, apart from what lies between you and me. When, kneeling beside the body of your friend that day at Gavrillac, you insulted and provoked me, had I been the tiger you conceived me, I must have killed you too. I am, as you may know, a man of quick passions, yet I curbed the natural anger you aroused in me, because I could forgive an affront to myself where I could not overlook a calculated attack upon my order. He paused a moment. André-Louis stood rigid, listening and wondering. So, too, the others, then M. Le Marquis resumed on a note of less assurance. In the matter of Emily Benet, I was unfortunate. I wronged you through inadvertence. I had no knowledge of the relations between you. André-Louis interrupted him sharply at last with a question. Would it have made a difference if you had? No, he was answered frankly. I have the faults of my kind. I cannot pretend that any such scruple as you suggest would have weighed with me. But can you, if you are capable of any detached judgment, blame me very much for that? All things considered, monsieur, I am rapidly being forced to the conclusion that it is impossible to blame any man for anything in this world, that we are all of us the sport of destiny. Consider, monsieur, this gathering, this family gathering, here tonight, whilst out there. Oh my God, let us make an end. Let us go our ways and write finest to this horrible chapter of our lives. M. La Tour considered him gravely, sadly, in silence for a moment. Perhaps it is best, he said at length, in a small voice. He turned to Madame de Plougastel. If a wrong I have to admit in my life, a wrong that I must bitterly regret, it is the wrong that I have done to you, my dear. Not now, Gervais. Not now, she faltered, interrupting him. Now, for the first and the last time, I am going. It is not likely that we shall ever meet again, that I shall ever see any of you again, you who should have been the nearest and dearest to me. We are all, he says, the sport of destiny. But not quite. Destiny is an intelligent force, moving with purpose. In life we pay for the evil that in life we do. That is the lesson that I have learnt tonight. By an act of betrayal, I begot unknown to me a son who, whilst as ignorant as myself of our relationship, has come to be the evil genius of my life, to cross and thwart me, and finally to help to pull me down in ruin. It is just, poetically just, my full and resigned acceptance of that fact is the only atonement I can offer you. He stooped and took one of Madame's hands that lay limply in her lap. Goodbye, Therese. His voice broke. He had reached the end of his iron self-control. She rose and clung to him a moment, unashamed before them. The ashes of that dead romance had been deeply stirred this night, and deep down some lingering embers had been found that glowed brightly now before their final extinction. Yet she made no attempt to detain him. She understood that their son had pointed out the only wise, the only possible course, and was thankful that M. de la Tour d'Azur accepted it. God keep you, Gervais, she murmured. You will take the safe conduct, and you will let me know when you are safe? He held her face between his hands an instant, then very gently kissed her and put her from him. Standing erect and outwardly calm again, he looked across at André-Louis, who was proffering him a sheet of paper. It is the safe conduct. Take it, monsieur. It is my first and last gift to you, and certainly the last gift I should ever have thought of making you. The gift of life. In a sense it makes us quits. The irony, sir, is not mine but fate's. Take it, monsieur, and go in peace. M. de la Tour d'Azur took it. His eyes looked hungrily into the lean face confronting him, so sternly set. He thrust the paper into his bosom, and then abruptly, convulsively, held out his hand. His son's eyes asked a question. "Let there be peace between us in God's name," said the Marquis thickly. Pity stirred at last in André-Louis. Some of the sternness left his face. He sighed. "Goodbye, monsieur," he said. "You are hard," his father told him, speaking wistfully. "But perhaps you are in the right so to be. In other circumstances, I should have been proud to have owned you as my son. As it is—" He broke off abruptly, and as abruptly added, "Goodbye." He loosed his son's hand and stepped back. They bowed formally to each other, and then de la Tour bowed to Emily de Circadia in utter silence, a bow that contained something of utter renunciation of finality. That done, he turned and walked stiffly out of the room, and so out of all their lives. Months later they were to hear of him in the service of the Emperor of Austria. Chapter 16. Sunrise. André-Louis took the air next morning on the terrace at Meudon. The hour was very early, and the newly risen sun was transmuting into diamonds the dewdrops that still lingered on the lawn. Down in the valley, 5 miles away, the morning mists were rising over Paris. Yet early as it was, a house on the hill was astir already, in a bustle of preparation for the departure that was imminent. André-Louis had won safely out of Paris last night with his mother and Aline, and today they were to set out all of them for Koblenz. To André-Louis, sauntering there with hands clasped behind him and head hunched between his shoulders, for life had never been richer in material for reflection, came presently Aline through one of the glass doors from the library. "You're early astir," she greeted him. "Faith, yes. I haven't been to bed." "No," he assured her, in answer to her exclamation. "I spent the night, or what was left of it, sitting at the window thinking. My poor André, you describe me perfectly. I am very poor, for I know nothing, understand nothing. It is not a calamitous condition until it is realized. Then he threw out his arms and let them fall again. His face, she observed, was very drawn and haggard. She paced with him along the old granite balustrade, over which the geraniums flung their mantle of green and scarlet. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" she asked him. "I have decided that I have no choice. I, too, must emigrate. I am lucky to be able to do so, lucky to have found no one amid yesterday's chaos in Paris to whom I could report myself as I foolishly desired. Else I might no longer be armed with these." He drew from his pocket the powerful passport of the Commission of 12, enjoining upon all Frenchmen to lend him such assistance as he might require, and warning those who might think it hindering him that they did so at their own peril. He spread it before her. "With this I conduct you all safely to the frontier. Over the frontier, M. de Circadia and Madame de Plougastel will have to conduct me, and then we shall be quits." "Quits," quoth she, "but you will be unable to return. You conceive, of course, my eagerness to do so. My child, in a day or two there will be inquiries. It will be asked what has become of me. Things will transpire. Then the hunt will start. But by then we shall be well upon our way, well ahead of any possible pursuit. You don't imagine that I could ever give the government any satisfactory explanation of my absence, assuming that any government remains to which to explain it. You mean that you will sacrifice your future, this career upon which you have embarked?" It took her breath away. "In the past to which things have come, there is no career for me down there, at least no honest one. And I hope you do not think that I could be dishonest. It is the day of the Dantons and the Marats, the day of the rabble. The reins of government will be tossed to the populace, or else the populace, drunk with the conceit with which the Dantons and the Marats have filled it, will seize the reins by force. Chaos must follow, and a despotism of brutes and apes, a government of the whole by its lowest parts. It cannot endure, because unless a nation is ruled by its best elements, it must wither and decay." "I thought you were a Republican," said she. "Why, so I am talking like one. I desire a society which selects its rulers from the best elements of every class and denies the right of any class or corporation to usurp the government to itself, whether it be the nobles, the clergy, the bourgeoisie, or the proletariat. For government by any one class is fatal to the welfare of the whole. 2 years ago, our ideal seemed to have been realized. The monopoly of power had been taken from the class that had held it too long and too unjustly by the hollow right of heredity. It had been distributed as evenly as might be throughout the state, and if men had only paused there, all would have been well. But our impetus carried us too far. The privileged orders goaded us on by their very opposition, and the result is a horror of which yesterday you saw no more than beginnings. No, no, he ended. Careers there may be for venal play seekers, for opportunists, but none for a man who desires to respect himself. It is time to go. I make no sacrifice in going. But where will you go? What will you do? Oh, something. Consider that in 4 years I have been lawyer, politician, swordsman, and buffoon, especially the latter. There is always a place in the world for Scaramouche. Besides, do you know that unlike Scaramouche, I have been oddly provident? I am the owner of a little farm in Saxony. I think that agriculture might suit me. It is a meditative occupation, and when all is said, I am not a man of action. I haven't the qualities for the part. She looked up into his face, and there was a wistful smile in her deep blue eyes. Is there any part for which you have not the qualities, I wonder? Do you really? Yet you cannot say that I have made a success of any of those which I played. I have always ended by running away. I am running away now from a thriving fencing academy, which is likely to become the property of Lou Duc, that comes of having gone into politics, from which I am also running away. It is the one thing in which I really excel. That, too, is an attribute of Scaramouche. Why will you always be deriding yourself? She wondered. Because I recognize myself for part of this mad world, I suppose. You wouldn't have me take it seriously? I should lose my reason utterly if I did, especially since discovering my parents. Don't, André, she begged him. You are insincere, you know. Of course I am. Do you expect sincerity in man when hypocrisy is the very keynote of human nature? We are nurtured on it. We are schooled in it. We live by it. And we rarely realize it. You have seen it rampant and out of hand in France during the past 4 years. Candid hypocrisy on the lips of the revolutionaries. Candid hypocrisy on the lips of the upholders of the old regime. A riot of hypocrisy out of which in the end is begotten chaos. And I who criticize it all on this beautiful God-given morning am the rancorest and most contemptible hypocrite of all. It was this. The realization of this truth kept me awake all night. For 2 years I have persecuted by every means in my power. M. de la Tourdiazer. He paused before uttering the name, paused as if hesitating how to speak of him. And in those 2 years I had deceived myself as the motive that was spurring me. He spoke of me last night as the evil genius of his life, and himself he recognized the justice of this. It may be that he was right, and because of that it is probable that even had he not killed Philippe de Vilmorin, things would still have been the same. Indeed, today I know that they must have been. That is why I call myself a hypocrite, a poor, self-duping hypocrite. But why, André? He stood still and looked at her. Because he sought you, Aline. Because in that alone he must have found me ranged against him, utterly intransigent. Because of that I must have strained every nerve to bring him down, so as to save you from becoming the prey of your own ambition. I wish to speak of him no more than I must. After this, I trust never to speak of him again. Before the lines of our lives crossed, I knew him for what he was. I knew the report of him that ran the countryside. Even then I found him detestable. You heard him allude last night to the unfortunate La Binet. You heard him plead, in extenuation of his fault, his mode of life, his rearing. To that there is no answer, I suppose. He conforms to type. Enough. But to me, he was the embodiment of evil, just as you have always been the embodiment of good. He was the embodiment of sin, just as you are the embodiment of purity. I had enthroned you so high, Aline, so high, and yet no higher than your place. Could I, then, suffer that you should be dragged down by ambition? Could I suffer the evil I detested to mate with the good I loved? What could have come of it but your own damnation, as I told you that day at Gavrillac? Because of that, my detestation of him became a personal, active thing. I resolved to save you at all costs from a fate so horrible. Had you been able to tell me that you loved him, it would have been different. I should have hoped that in a union sanctified by love you would have raised him to your own pure heights, but that out of considerations of worldly advancement you should lovelessly consent to mate with him. Oh, it was vile and hopeless. And so I fought him, a rat fighting a lion, fought him relentlessly until I saw that love had come to take in your heart the place of ambition. Then I desisted. Until you saw that love had taken the place of ambition. Tears had been gathering in her eyes whilst he was speaking. Now amazement eliminated her emotion. But when did you see that? When? I was mistaken. I know it now. Yet at the time, surely, Aline, that morning when you came to beg me not to keep my engagement with him, the Bois, you were moved by concern for him. For him. It was concern for you, she cried, without thinking what she said. But it did not convince him. For me? When you knew, when all the world knew what I'd been doing daily for a week. Ah! But he was different from the others you had met. His reputation stood high. My uncle accounted him invincible. He persuaded me that if you met nothing could save you. He looked at her frowning. Why, this lean? He asked her with some sternness. I can understand that, having changed since then, you should now wish to disown those sentiments. It is a woman's way, I suppose. Oh, what are you saying, André? How wrong you are. It is the truth I have told you. And was it concern for me, he asked her, that laid you swooning when you saw him return wounded from the meeting? That was what opened my eyes. Wounded? I had not seen his wound. I saw him sitting alive and apparently unhurt in his caleche, and I concluded that he had killed you as he had said he would. What else could I conclude? He saw a light, dazzling, blinding, and it scared him. He fell back, a hand to his brow. And that was why you fainted? He asked incredulously. She looked at him without answering. As she began to realize how much she had been swept into saying by her eagerness to make him realize his error, a sudden fear came creeping into her eyes. He held out both hands to her. Aline! Aline! His voice broke on the name. It was I. Oh, blind André, it was always you. Always. Never did I think of him. Not even for loveless marriage. Save once for a little while, when that theater girl came into your life and then she broke off, shrugged, and turned her head away. I thought of following ambition, since there was nothing left to follow. He shook himself. I am dreaming, of course, or else I am mad, he said. Blind, André, just blind, she assured him. Blind only where it would have been presumption to have seen. And yet, she answered him with a flash of the Aline he had known of old, I have never found you lack presumption. De Circadia, emerging a moment later from the library window, beheld them holding hands and staring each at the other beatifically, as if each saw a paradise in the other's face.